Welcome to the Pillar Podcast, where we put racial equity front and center. Join us as we explore equity. We'll take a look at overcoming opportunity gaps and strategies that ensure equitable learning experiences for all students in JCPS.
So we had this conversation about this time last year, pretty close, and my goal is to just extend that interview and maybe go into a little more depth on some of the things that we covered last year.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll get right into it. One thing I know about you, I learned this last year, is that you have your principal's certification.
Yes, I do.
Right, amongst the other degrees you've acquired over the year. With having a principal's certification, does that help you see through another lens when working with the council and new principals?
It does, but I think more, Ian, is that my experience as a principal intern better equipped me to be to support our councils. While I learned so much in my principal prep program, and thank you, kudos to the University of Louisville, they did a phenomenal job. But where I really learned to be a principal was when I was the principal intern back in 2008. I served under Dr. Tracy Barber, and she was at Okolona Elementary at the time, and Dr. Dewey Hensley, he was at Atkinson Elementary. And while I learned a lot from my principal prep, Tracy and Dewey were the ones who really taught me how to be a principal. But the one thing that I took from that is the pace of the principalship. It is unforgiving. And so when I email a principal, or when I call a principal, or when I reach out to help them better support their council, I know that there's a lot of things going on, and they're not just sitting in their office and waiting to take my phone call or waiting for emails. That there's a lot of things that they are doing that aren't just council work. But I do want to make sure that they are supported so that they can better serve our councils, and therefore our councils can better serve our students.
So this is something I'm learning new about you today. Was the internship a part of that certification, or was that something you requested, or was it above and beyond? Like, I'm interested in the intern part.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So this was part of a larger program that JCPS had in place in the mid 2000s to help grow their own principals. So I participated actually in every single one of them. There was a program that was an introductory one, and then they had the Principals for Tomorrow program, and then they also had the principal internship. And what I think is so wonderful is so many of my colleagues I grew up in those programs with that were principals, and so that's been a wonderful experience continuing to work with them. And that was just a robust program that this district had in place at the time. Now, Ian, I meet with a variety of people for a variety of reasons, and gosh, I think sometime this previous year, I met with 3 principal interns. We had one at elementary, one middle, and one high to talk to them about council support and provide information to them in that area. And so I do think that we are working hard to groom our leaders, and that we may be reviving at least aspects of that program.
Yeah, well, that's an amazing opportunity. I think something that is eye-opening, I would imagine. And so you mentioned sharing council information with principals.
Yeah.
Are councils involved in the decision-making process for new principals?
Well, it depends. So I'm going to kind of back up and give a little more of an aerial view. So we have 2 types of councils, kind of air quote councils. We have the regular school-based decision-making, or SBDM councils, that are what you and I know. They're part of KRS 16345. They're the 2 parents, the 3 teachers, and the principal. And sometimes you'll double that model, and sometimes it'll be a little bit different, but that's kind of standard. And then you'll have those advisory leadership teams. Those are very similar to councils, except They don't have the capacity that councils do in just a few areas. They still have a high sense of efficacy, and we really treat them as if they are SBDM councils, but there are some differences. One, and with SBDM councils, they're consulted in the hiring of staff.
Okay.
Advisory leadership teams are not. Another factor is advisory leadership teams, while strongly encouraged to complete training, legally aren't required to complete the training. School-based decision-making, or SBDM councils, are required to complete that training. Also, there are some unusual parameters with the advisory leadership team that are a little looser than for the SBDM councils. But one of the biggest differences that we see is that advisory leadership teams, while they hold a bit of a place in the process of principal selection, it's nothing like the process for this SBDM councils. Your SBDM councils will have a policy that outlines how the principal is selected. That policy generally is where the council will create a principal selection interview committee, and that committee will be the council and additional stakeholders. When they do that, we ask that they honor the diversity of the school when selecting the additional members. With SBDM councils and advisory leadership teams, diversity is required by law because all schools of 8% more minority student populations are required to have a minority member at any role, and we have some councils where every single person on the council is a minority. So that's a requirement there. So minority representation in the principal selection process. Then that group of people will go through and they will develop interview questions. They'll survey stakeholders, and they'll ultimately decide who to interview within the parameters of guidance from our superintendent. And then they'll ultimately make a recommendation to the superintendent. Now, the law changed back in 2019 for JCPS only that states now that the superintendent has the final say. But Dr. Polio does a really good job of involving councils in the selection process. So often they'll be given a few candidates to select from, and they're all top-notch candidates. So it's one of those, we always tell councils, you can't go wrong.
You can't go wrong. Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really their role that they'll play in the selection of the principal for the school-based decision-making councils.
And you mentioned in that response the policies, right? And to my understanding, there are 3 types of policy, right?
You got it.
Legally required, best practices, and additional. So the policies implemented by SBDM are designed to support student achievement. How do you or the council decide what areas of policy to start with?
Oh, okay, that's a great question. So all of our schools have the legally required policies. Most of our schools have every single best practice policy. And then with the additional policies, those are ones that not every school has. You'll commonly see the additional policies as dress code uniform is one of the most common additional policy. So what we do is we have sample policies. Those policies are developed by me, and then in the spring, after the legislative session has concluded, I'll go through and make updates based on changes in the law. I'll also make updates based on input from council members. And then that information, those updates will go to the expert in that area. So if you're the budget expert, you're going to be reviewing the budget policy. And then that policy will come back to me for final review, and we'll send it off to materials production to make sure it's nice and edited
Nice
and
and
a great example for the council. But they're just, they're samples. So we tell councils, go through and make sure that they're what's best for you. And so they'll go through those sample policies and they'll make them the best. We recommend that the council review the policy every 1 to 2 years, and each month the council will receive an agenda from my office. It doesn't mean they have to cover the item in that agenda, but what it does mean is that if you follow those agendas, that you're going to cover most of the major items that are required. So those agendas, if you follow those, you will review every single legally required and best practice policy each and every year, as well as ensure that you're following the budget guidelines, following the comprehensive school improvement guidelines, and all of that information.
It's pretty robust checks and balances.
Absolutely.
But I also think it's good. Like, you provide a foundation, right? Cover these steps, and you're more times than not going to make sure you check every box you need to check as far as a review goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I get questions about the Racial Equity Analysis Protocol, or the REAP. Because one of the things that I do with all of those samples policies is we send them through the REAP, the Racial Equity Analysis Protocol, which in layman's term is just a series of questions that you are to respond to ensure that we're teasing out any potential inequities. And I'll have principals who say, well, Shauna, you've already put it through the REAP. Why do we need to do it? And I'll explain to them just the sample policies are, in terms of JCPS, one size fits most. There's no guarantee that a policy that is equitable for most of Jefferson County might not, based on your individual student population, be inequitable. And so we ask that they let us know if there are any cases like that. And the conversation is so valuable, Ian, just talking about, because we're looking specifically at our students and race and how we can make sure that it's fair for everyone.
Which is, man, that's a huge lift, but again, more eyes on it on the front end, I think, kind of ensures the potential of having a non-equitable component or piece is embedded. Given the size of the district, right, and you mentioned how different school communities, it varies, right? Do you find any disparities or consistent disparities in school communities that have a strong council presence as compared to some school communities that may not have as strong of a council?
Most often, Ian, it is up to the principal. There are a variety of factors, but if there is a strong culture and climate in the building, the principal is the one who usually creates the weather, if you will. And that also applies to the council. So, for example, if you value culture and climate, and I know when I come to you with concerns, you're going to listen, I'm going to be more likely to come to you with concerns, and we're going to be more likely to do things to improve the school and improve student achievement. So while it's not entirely the principal makes such a huge difference in the culture and climate of the building, and therefore with the council.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that, because we know culture and climate is one of the pillars within JCPS's racial equity policy, and more times than not, when we're mentioning culture and climate, it's around the student. Do you feel that climate and culture of our parent and guardians also contribute to student success? And if so, in what way?
I believe that parents and guardians absolutely contribute to student success in a variety of ways. And often it can be how they discuss the students, the staff, the school with their individual student. So I have a son, and he is a freshman in high school. And the nature of freshmen in high school, like all of a sudden this attitude has come. I guess it's been festering. Yeah. And so we have to, so there are things that at the dinner table I won't let him say. We don't complain about school because it serves no purpose. And we don't complain about teachers. It serves no purpose. Now we teach them how to advocate appropriately. But I think about from the parent perspective, so much of that conversation at the dinner table or in front of the TV or just sitting around just on game night can therefore impact their culture and climate of the school and how students feel when they come in.
And student voice it's major. Like, we want to hear from our students and their experiences, because they are a major stakeholder within a school community. So the student body as a stakeholder within that same culture and climate theme as it relates to the council. Students don't always know what's best for them in the long run. How does the council find happy mediums between what students feel they want versus what I'd say us as a district or educators feel they need?
So students love to talk about dress code and uniform.
That's a big one, huh?
It is. It's a big one. And it's kind of, it makes me happy because students are very likely to come and present to the council their thought on dress codes and uniforms. And so the council does provide them the opportunity to do that. So it can be anything from the council deciding that they want to survey their students on, what the next year's uniform or dress code should look like, or students coming and presenting directly to the council. One of our middle school students emailed me. She had some very legitimate concerns about their dress code. And so I said to her, you know what, let's make this happen. Let's go ahead and we'll make arrangements so that you can speak to the council directly and they can use that information that you provide to make decisions to impact. So one student just taking that initiative is going to have a profound impact on this middle school's dress code.
On the entire student body.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a beautiful thing. I was fortunate enough to not have uniforms my entire middle and high school career. I did have them, I say 3 years or so, and we would complain to one another about it, but I'm not sure if we really knew that we could go to, say, a council or where we would go to voice that concern. Let's say that experience rings true for somebody today. How would a student know, or where would a student go to get informed about joining a council or being a part of those conversations?
Absolutely. So some of our high schools and one of our middle high schools does have students on the council. They're non-voting and they are there to provide input as a student, and that's very beneficial. You'll see a lot of our clubs, specifically our Black student unions, will appoint someone to be on the SBDM council, and they will come to the table and they will provide that student voice, specifically that minority student voice. And so that's a great way for students to be involved. But Ian, not every school has that. Not every high school has that. And so if a council is interested, or if a student is interested in that, they can approach the principal and talk to them about that process. They can approach me and I can assist them in that process. And even if they don't want to serve in full capacity as a council member, I can certainly provide information on how they can participate at meetings.
I want to jump to what we all know as CSIP, right? That is the Comprehensive School Improvement Plan. And that focuses on finding and providing the right resources for student achievement. In such a large district with a variety of school communities, most of the time policy is dictated from top down. How does the council find room to accomplish goals or policy that's specific to a certain school community versus kind of a one-size-fits majority?
Well, your CSIP is going to be based on your test scores. And so if your test scores show that your students are struggling in, let's say, English language arts, but not in math, your focus, of course, is going to be improving English language arts. And so that's where the kind of top-down feels like it's coming, because you're given your test scores, and that then, once you have that data, that's how you formulate the plan. But what the council decides to do to meet that need for for improving English language arts and comprehension of that content area will be something that they're going to plan, and that is a living document. So it's not something that once it's created is going to sit on a shelf and that's the law of the land. No, it's modified, and actually councils review their CSIP in some capacity at every single meeting.
Wow. Oh, I would not have imagined it was that
every
frequent.
Every single meeting. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, being a living document, I would imagine that. So in real time, who makes those adjustments within the CSIP?
Oh, that would be the council and the principal.
Council and the principal together.
They'll review, and then the principal will be the one who's authorized to make those changes.
So along with student as a major stakeholder, obviously parent, guardian, and family is involved from a stakeholder's perspective. Most, if not all, divisions within JCPS have some sort of family engagement component. And I believe it's safe to say that family engagement at times can be difficult. What are some of the struggles you've encountered as it relates to getting parents and guardians involved in conversations of what's happening within their child's school community?
You know, sometimes I think we over-communicate, and sometimes I think we under-communicate. I think that varies from school to school. But I think often communicating differently can make a difference. I assist with the elections of parents throughout the district. So many of our PTAs don't have access to survey tools such as SurveyMonkey, and so I will work with them to collect the nominations for the parent position, and I'll send them out and hold the election for them. I have access to SurveyMonkey, and that's just a great resource to make that happen. And I'm consistently amazed at when I call for nominations, the number of people who will throw their name in the hat. And then the number of people who will vote in the elections. I'll have principals who say, you know, I've tried, nobody is interested. And I'll throw out the nomination, I'll have 20 people who are interested. And I follow up with them to make sure they indeed are interested. And I don't think it's anything that's a lack of communication on the part of the principal. I think that the email that comes directly from me is just noticeable because it's, who's this Shauna Stinton lady, and why is she emailing me about my child's school? So I think that works to my advantage.
Absolutely.
And I know that information, my son's school sends out a newsletter every Wednesday, and it's so easy just to miss something. You know, and it's great that it comes in one nice package once a week. But again, it's easy to kind of become complacent and look at that. But if I get an email from somebody I don't know, I'm like, oh, it's this.
So the policy piece, I've learned so much about who's involved in the policy making process through our conversations, and I know that that's something that doesn't happen overnight, right? Like policy and change just don't happen overnight. In a society where, you know, we're so accustomed and groomed to quick results, like everything is a quick turn, right? We want real time results and responses. How do you push through such demanding work, knowing you may not see an immediate impact in council decisions?
So every once in a while, we will discover that there is something that's inequitable, and we are able to pivot very quickly. So I think about probably 10 years ago, there was an issue with hair. And so we were able to very quickly work with our councils to help them to understand the inequity of stating the student could or could not have a specific hairstyle. And we were able to have them remove that from all of their policies. So within a month, which is a pretty quick turnaround when you consider first reading, second reading, and adoption, we were able to work with 150 councils to make that happen. So if something is negatively impacting student achievement, we can make the change and we can make it pretty quickly. That's a very unusual situation that I just told you about, but it is one that comes to mind when I talk about that.
So you've been in, I would say, the game for some time, right? Many different roles, many different hats, different capacities. What would today's Dr. Stinton say to the Dr. Stinton who accepted this position a few years ago?
That you will continue to love your job because it's always changing. If I see an issue I can make a change to make it better. I can create better supports for councils. I can create better supports for principals, better training, more equitable resources based on knowledge gleaned. So the position that I had when I started 13 years ago was completely different than the position that I have now.
Well, as we wrap this up, I want community at large to know how they can get a hold of Dr. Stinton or someone from the council should they look to join or have questions. I think it's a good opportunity to share that information.
Absolutely. Well, email is a great way to get in touch with me, and it's just shauna.stinton at jefferson.kyschools.us. So that's Shauna, SHAWNA .Stinton, STENTON. If you search JCPS SBDM, you'll see my name. It'll show up. And if you search SBDM or JCPS SBDM on Google, you'll be able to see our website very quickly. It has a lot of great information. And if you're looking for particular opportunities to serve on a council or to learn more about a council, reach out to me. I'll be happy to provide any assistance. And if you're not so inclined with technology, give me a call, 485-3056. If you call, you'll get me. I answer my phone directly, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have and support you in any way that you need.
Well, Shauna, thank you for your time. I enjoyed the conversation as always. This is another episode of The Pillar. Ian Brandon as your host, Dr. Shauna Stinton, Office of School-Based Decision Making.